No. Plenty of technology exists to safely, filter and treat the water, and there's a lot of more public possibilities than there are for the individual residential on-site user. You can actually argue a return on investment, even though water costs are low, for a system for a 100-unit apartment building versus a single-family residence or a school dormitory, for instance, because now the potential amount of water that's saved can correspond to the system cost, because the systems don't go up in cost exponentially, for the larger buildings versus it's actually harder to make the smaller unit for the single residence cost effectively than it is the larger system.
One topic that was brought up this morning, Collin, I want to ask you about is there was one study completed in Australia that indicated that homes that use gray water systems use more water overall than those not using gray water. Do you have any thoughts on why that happened, and how can we prevent that from happening here?
Yes, it's a good point. I think it is about. I think the example, the rationale that was possibly brought up was because the householder felt that they had an unlimited supply of water all of a sudden, and therefore could use it pretty flagrantly. I think what we've seen in Australia, at least, is that single dwelling individual, as Mike says, individual recycling of water back into the buildings has not yet really taken off. I think it will take off, and a couple of things need to happen. We as our company build systems like this, but mainly for commercial buildings and for multiple dwellings. And we started off with single dwellings, and what we did find is that unless you have an enthusiast who genuinely knows what the treatment system or recycling system is capable of, you can get into difficulties. And where we found difficulties is that when we would get a phone call from, we've got a long-term study going on, and some of the participants in the study would call us and tell us that our treatment system isn't generating any wastewater or any water for recycling, and that was because they were expecting perhaps 1,000 gallons a day out of this treatment system, but they're only generating about 400 gallons a day in the house. So even some fundamental things that we as water experts consider second nature, the householder doesn't, because they just think that this perhaps could generate more water than was actually absolutely available. So I think single dwellings is a bit problematic. Also from the servicing aspect that you brought up as well. What we found is even though we would enter into a service contract with the householder, the cost of that is difficult at this point to make cost effective, and as was said in some of the discussions this morning, it really needs to just work. It really needs to be like a genuine appliance in a single household before you can implement it and be confident that it is going to work. I know we're not to that point, and I don't think anybody is in Australia yet to that point, and that's where it needs to be. Where we've seen the best uptake is in multiple dwellings or commercial buildings where you do have the economy of scale, as Mike says, where you can build the service contract into multiple people. The cost comes down, the economy of scale for the system comes down. It does become a genuinely commercially viable proposition.
Sort of a two-part question. There's work underway in the U.S. now on water quality standards for recycled and reclaimed water. What should those standards be? Are we headed in the right direction? And are there any international standards for water quality that we can just borrow or steal?
Yeah, setting water quality objectives for each application is absolutely important. It needs to become very clear how these have originated and why they've originated. The big step forward that, at least, again, forgive me for bringing up Australia, but I do genuinely believe that out of what we've seen, the National Recycled Water Guidelines that came out in the end of 2006, if anybody's interested, I can send you the link, but it is the best that we have seen, and It is a bit of a daunting document. It's about 400 pages, and you look for it and you do not see a single table which tells you what water quality you need in terms of E. coli or viruses. What it brings forward is a methodology, and it looks at the source and it looks at the use. And it will start, so it provides a framework where people can, particularly regulators, can adopt standards for particular purposes, so then it becomes clear. It wouldn't be, Mike and Peter and I might have a different opinion as to whether or not grey water should be used subsurface, or what quality should be used for surface irrigation, what quality should be used in toilet flushing. Well, this sets it out really quite clearly. And so what it does is it looks at the source and it applies for virtually any type of water reuse application you might look at. I should emphasise that really what we're doing in Australia, almost none of it is recycling for drinking. As been mentioned earlier on today, you can make such great strides with recycling for non-drinking purposes, and it becomes very much an emotional argument rather than a technical argument as to whether you should recycle water for drinking. And I know in Australia we're nowhere near that, getting over that emotional hurdle. But for non-drinking purposes, it's becoming widely embraced. And this methodology might look at something like starting off with rainwater for subsurface irrigation, low level of contamination, a low risk use. And therefore the amount of treatment that is required may be none or may be very small. It builds up from there, so that you might head from the source being grey water for untreated for subsurface irrigation, grey water treated for toilet flushing, black water treated for different applications, right up to the point that we're actually doing in Sydney CBD right now, Sydney downtown area, the first black water treatment system for use for toilet flushing and cooling towers. And it addresses the issue that Bill Hoffman said earlier about the massive amount of water that's used for cooling towers. Well, the amount of treatment that is required for that application is quite high, but it's all about fit for purpose water. And I think certainly if people get their minds around, and it takes an investment in time to get your mind around the National Recycled Water Guidelines from Australia, it's a very useful tool in setting water quality objectives. And then the best advantage of that is that if you go back and look at it 5 years' time and everybody's moved on, you can go back to first principles and see why it is those water quality objectives were set.
Paul, one of the most debated issues during the development of the green supplement was the color and identification of the pipe. I know that the waterworks people came in, they wanted to claim that they own purple pipe, it should be some other color, and there was some debates like, how do you know if the pipe has rainwater or gray water in it? It seems like we've settled on purple pipe. What are your thoughts on this issue, and what are some other countries doing for the pipe?
Look, I'd have to say that the US is not alone, but it's pretty much one of the few countries that specifies purple as only being used for treated water. From a personal perspective, as a manufacturer of systems, we prefer that there was some sort of definition, because we're still flying out there blind. But from a practical perspective, we actually don't mind for the moment, because we can use black with a little bit of purple striping. It seems to get us past most regulators. And that's a practical colour in the garden. Black hides pretty well in mulch. Purple stands out like anything. So you'll see a lot of purple pipe in gardens in Australia. And that, to me, that's a downside. It doesn't need to be bright purple, not for garden irrigation. If I may, can I just address the Western Australian study that was done? Things have moved on in Australia in terms of grey water irrigation in the gardens. About 5 to 10 years ago, we were using technology which was placing the grey water 6 to 12 inches under the ground. Netafim in Australia actually developed a dripper line, which was the first one that could actually run with 400 micron filtration, so very little filtration. What that did in the end was that, and we've done over 1,000 systems in Australia installed, is that when we put a grey water system in the garden, the existing potable water system is ripped out. Now that changes people's attitudes towards water. The problem with the Western Australian situation was that the potable water irrigation systems were also put in. So in addition to reusing grey water in the garden, they still had their irrigation controller. So they were doubling up.